All right. So we are back for the third session with Mr. Tom Price. And today we've actually got a special guest. In fact, after having three of us last time, which was, of course, me and Rainn Wilson and Tom as our main speaker, Tom really liked having the dynamic of three people. And we thought, well, you know what? That's a really cool idea of always having three people. And then we figured we'd just invite fun, cool people, maybe Baha'is, maybe not, from all around the world. And so this time we found somebody named Mrs. Sarah Perry. Although, Sarah, you have some pretty cool news from this past week. So I wonder, is Sarah Perry really going to be your name?
Yes, I'm going to keep my name, Joel Price. But I am married.
Yes.
Found,
How long ago was that, Sarah?
Found love in the times of COVID. So that's a rare find. But yeah, it's been good so far. It's a good week.
It was literally a week ago, and you did the wedding, which I watched over Skype or Zoom or one of those things. Well, how long has it been? What, 7, 8, 9 days now?
Yeah, actually, it was week ago, Tuesday the 19th of May. So it's been 10, 11 days. It's been pretty good.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I'm so happy that you were able to find love and get married. And now I'm really excited to have you on this phone call, Sarah. So you
I'm excited
can
to be
interact.
here. This is going to be great.
So Tom, we had some great sessions. Of course, we had a session with Mr. Rainn Wilson was the session number 1, and then it was me and Rainn on session number 2. Now we're in for a third session with you. What are we going to be talking about today, Tom?
Well, I had to think really hard because there's about 20 subjects that we want to talk about. And I decided that the most important element of spirituality, the most important component to the spiritual life is happiness. Happiness, joy, contentment, radiance. I think that's the first thing we need to work on if we want to become truly spiritual. And the reason I think this is that Abdu'l-Baha himself, whenever he greeted somebody, the first thing he said is, "Are you happy?" He wanted to know that first. You know, not are you wealthy, are you healthy, or whatever, are you successful, do you have a lot of money, are you happy? Because happiness really is the most important thing in life. It's more important than wealth, because I know some people that are wealthy that are still not happy. I know some people that don't have much and they are happy. It's more important than health, because I know people that are healthy and they're still not happy, and I know people that are not healthy and they are happy. In other words, happiness is the single most important thing, and we need to know how to find it. So I decided that that is the first component. There's a reason why I chose happiness. Well, the reason I chose that is that without happiness, we don't have our full power and strength. We don't have the ability to become truly spiritual without happiness. I learned this from modern science, but it only confirmed what I read that Abdu'l-Baha said way back in 1912. And this came from a talk that he gave in Paris. You know that Abdu'l-Baha had traveled for 3 years, and he said he was never ill even once during his trip until just near the end when he got to Paris. He came down with an illness. And so he ended up staying in Paris much longer. And of course, we have many talks now from that. And his very first talk in Paris, he began, and I'm going to read just the first bit of this talk. He said, "In this world, we are influenced by 2 sentiments, joy and pain." In other words, he's talking about, happiness and sorrow. And he first mentions the importance of joy. He says, joy gives us wings. In times of joy, our strength is more vital, our intellect keener, and our understanding less clouded. We seem better able to cope with the world and find our sphere of usefulness. So he says, when you have joy, you have stronger mental capacity, keener intellect, better understanding. In other words, joy helps you in many ways. And then he immediately said, but when sadness visits us, we become weak, our strength leaves us, our comprehension is dim, and our intelligence veiled. The actualities of life seem to elude our grasp. The eyes of our spirits fail to discover the secret mysteries, and we become even as dead beings. So he begins like this, saying that you really have 2 minds. You have 2 parts. And when you're happy, you have strength. and ability and intelligence. And when you are sad, then you have a lower amount of comprehension and intelligence. And of course, when he said this in 1912, they did not have MRIs, magnetic resonance imaging. But recent research has found that he was absolutely right, that you process happiness and sadness in two completely different parts of your brain. They found this out now. So they confirmed, maybe 100 years after Abdu'l-Baha said it, that really, when you are sad, you are in a different brain entirely. And when you're happy, you're in a different brain entirely. And so I decided that happiness has got to be the first step that we have to take if we want to be truly spiritual beings.
That's really fascinating. And really one thing that stands out to me is it's topical during this Corona COVID world that we're experiencing right now. And there's honestly a ton of depression and confusion and so forth. And do you feel like in a way that's actually adding to, of course, that's making people unhappy. And is that adding to, you're saying it really makes you unhealthy when you're actually in a state of depression. Does that make sense?
It definitely has an effect on your health and also on your ability to understand and your intellect.
So it's like a superpower having happiness, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think that's a good way to look at it. That's exactly what Abdu'l-Baha said.
And you can actually get sicker by being depressed, but also on the flip side, you can be healthier and maybe even to some degree, say your immune system's stronger when you're actually happier. Would that be true?
Yes.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Okay, this is interesting. So what would actually cause someone to be happy and what would cause them to be sad?
Oh, that's really a good question. And in fact, that's the most important question of all. And Abdu'l-Baha actually said that. He said that sorrow comes from the world of matter and happiness comes from the spiritual world. In other words, the physical world causes all kinds of grief and sorrow. The spiritual world, he says, only gives you joy. And so he says we suffer unhappiness because of the outcome of material things. And all our trials and troubles, they come from this world of illusion, this physical world, which we're talking about. So we need to understand that sadness comes from the physical world and happiness comes from the spiritual.
Is this why there's a lot of celebrities out there that are struggling with happiness?
That's a very good question. Yes, not just celebrities, but anybody that pins their hopes on material things, whether it be wealth or fame or success or comfort or luxury, if you pin your happiness hopes on those things, you are going to be unhappy. In fact, I was reading recently, the United States consumes more resources than any other nation on the planet. I think more than 20% of all the resources. Yet they're only about 4% of the world. Yet there's a chart that I just read of the rates of depression in the world by all countries. Do you know what nation has the highest rate of depression in the world?
Well, I'm guessing by your statements that it is the United States.
Good guess, which is interesting because most of us think there is a correlation between wealth and happiness. And in fact, there is a correlation. It's just not the correlation that we think. It's the opposite of what we think.
So, Tom, are you suggesting that potentially individuals that, get a lot of money and are happy, or maybe have fame and are happy, it's more of an illusion of happiness? Is that something that you're suggesting here?
It's interesting. We'll talk about this a little bit more as we get into the program. But we don't understand that the physical world will always make us unhappy. Sooner or later, it's going to make you unhappy. And material things, they really don't give you happiness. They give you a false sense of happiness. When you want to buy something, before you have it, before you buy it, you might be looking at the brochure or studying it on the internet, and you're smiling and you're so happy that you're going to buy this, and then finally you get the money and you buy the thing. And then as soon as you have it, it doesn't seem as good as when you wanted it. There's an old saying, it says, possession diminishes value instantly as soon as you possess something. So what do? You turn your sights towards some other possession. and you do the same cycle over and over again. Now, there's nothing wrong with the physical world and having possessions and having comfort and luxury. There's nothing wrong with them. But sooner or later, this physical world will make us unhappy, and we need to understand that when we are unhappy, where we turn to for happiness, and that is to draw closer to God, to the spiritual world, to find the sweetness of God's compassion, and that will bestow us happiness no matter what happens to us in life. You see, we see proofs of the inadequacy of the material world everywhere. We see this in everything.
Yeah, for sure. You can see it all around us.
Tom, I've got to throw in a little bit of devil's advocacy because I'm sitting here thinking of our listeners and viewers thinking, how can America be the most depressed nation on the planet when you've got places like Syria and these really horrible situations in these countries, riddled with war or other things? Can you really say that America is the most depressed nation?
Well, I'm quoting from statistics. If you go on the internet, in fact, what I'll do is I'll post it here in a moment for you. I'll show you the actual chart that says the United States has the highest rate of depression. I might point out that most other nations also have very similar rates. The reason, you asked me how come, and it's because of materialism. Materialism is the answer to your question, why can Americans be more depressed than others? Because starting about 100 to 150 years ago, the Western world adopted what we call a materialistic view of society. The belief that people's happiness would be the natural result of better health, better food, better education, better living conditions, the acquisition of wealth and comfort, material things. It was believed that if we could acquire these things, we would be happier. And governments and agencies have worked on this belief, thinking that this would lead to happiness. But in fact, studies have showed the opposite is true.
Okay. So, how do we achieve happiness? What is happiness? Educate me.
Well, of course, the first thing, the fundamental thing is to understand that this physical world is transitory. It's not going to last for very long. And we are going to go on to a wonderful, beautiful spiritual world. Baha'u'llah says, sorrow not if things contrary to your wishes happen on this earthly plane, for days of blissful joy are in store for you, and things of this nature. You know, if something is transitory, you can accept it much better. Have you ever had to sleep on the floor for one night or 2 nights in a room, even though you're not going to live there? Has that ever happened to you?
Yes. In Taiwan, yeah. They have the hardest beds for some reason.
Yes, but you can take it because you know that it's only a couple of nights. Isn't that right? Because you know that your future is going to not be sleeping on that floor forever. Well, it's something like that, even with the physical world.
I'm interested in how, as human beings, currently we're living in a physical world. So how do we transcend that physical reality if we're saying that happiness is spiritually based?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that happiness comes from within. It doesn't come from an external source. Baha'u'llah, in one of his hidden words, he said, rejoice in the gladness of thine heart. That's where he says you need to rejoice in your own heart. These days, we kind of think that happiness is something that comes externally, something that we can get from some other source. In fact, if a little child says to their parent, Mommy, I'm bored, suddenly the parent says, oh my God, the child's bored. We got to do something. Give them a video game, give them a candy, give them cake. In other words, we're teaching the children that when they're unhappy, they look for it in an external source. And then, of course, later on, we grow up and we're constantly looking for happiness from external sources. We might look for it in food. We might look for it in binging on TV shows. We might look for it in sex. We might look for it in fame. We might look for it in attention. In other words, we pin our hopes on getting happiness from external sources, and this is just an illusion. We're chasing something. We're looking for happiness in the wrong place. Baha'u'llah says, rejoice in the gladness of your own heart. So I think you have to first understand that you have a body and you have a soul, And material civilization is not adequate for the needs of mankind. It cannot cause happiness. Material civilization is like the body, and spiritual civilization is like the soul, and the body without the soul cannot live. So I think what you're asking is, what are the essential characteristics of the spiritual life in relation to happiness? I think the first component of a happy life can be summed up in the word contentment. Contentment, this is a word that is used constantly in the Baha'i writings, and contentment means that you accept, not just accept, but you're happy with your life. You're happy with every moment of your life. You say at every point in your life, this is the best thing that can happen to me. When you're talking with any person, you're not looking at your watch and looking across the room or rolling your eyes, something like that. You're thinking, this is the most important person I can be with at this moment.
So just on that point, how does that tie in with Shoghi Effendi had said one should strive for excellence, so always better oneself in every aspect? So how do those two go hand in hand?
Right. So this is a question that people often ask. They say, does contentment mean that you should just be satisfied with your lot in life and not try and prove yourself and just accept things? That's not what contentment means. Of course, we should strive for excellence. Of course, we should strive to better the world, to better ourselves, to alleviate the conditions of the world. But we are still content with God's will and what we are given in life. We are never upset. You know, it's an interesting thing that originally the Christians, Catholics to begin with, they had a concept called the 7 deadly sins. You've heard of the 7 deadly sins?
Yes.
Okay. And they are like gluttony, and gluttony is my favorite one. I like that one, but there's a few other ones. What
Sloth,
greed,
rage or anger. Yeah,
greed,
for sure.
Yes, but you know, they're called the 7 deadly sins, okay?
There's a movie with Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt called Seven.
Is that right? Okay.
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
So it's interesting that the original 7 deadly sins, if you look in history, go look that up on Google, one of the 7 deadly sins was unhappiness. Did you know that? One of them was unhappiness.
I had no idea.
It was on the first list originally for several centuries, but at some stage, one of the popes, I think it was one of the Gregory popes, there were several of them, he wasn't happy with unhappiness being a sin. So it got changed. They changed one of the sins. It ultimately became what we now call sloth, which is to be, not working too hard and being lazy. But the reason the early Christians thought that unhappiness was a sin was because it meant that you were not trusting in God, that you didn't have faith, you didn't trust in God. And so that was considered a sin. Today, we do not think unhappiness is a sin, like, oh, you committed a sin, you murdered somebody or something. When you're unhappy, we don't think that we did something wrong. We just think it's something that came to us and we can't control it. We have no control over it. Whereas I think the early Christians had it right. Today, if we're unhappy, we think we can take a pill, or we think we want to be entertained or something like that. So whenever I think about this word contentment, I always remember the very first interview that Abdu'l-Baha gave in London when he first arrived there. He was a prisoner for most of his life, from the age of 9 until nearly 60 years old. When he was finally freed from prison, as an old man, he traveled, went to France for a couple of weeks. And when he arrived in London, he had an interview. And I have a transcript of that interview here now. I'm going to read this to you. The reporter said, "Will you tell us how you felt while in prison and how you regard your freedom? We are glad that you are free." Abdu'l-Baha replied, "Thank you. Freedom is not a matter of place. It is a condition. I was thankful for the prison, and the lack of liberty was very pleasing to me, for those days were passed in the path of service under the utmost difficulties and trials, bearing fruits and results. Unless one accepts dire vicissitudes, he will not attain." I'll stop right there. Do you know what a vicissitude is?
Yeah, like tests.
It's a really bad test, right? Yeah. Okay. Do you know what dire means?
Like
severe.
Desperate.
Yes. Okay, so he's talking to this reporter in London. He says, unless one accepts dire vicissitudes, he will not attain. To me, prison is freedom. Troubles rest me. Death is life, and to be despised is honor. Therefore, I was happy all that time in prison. When one is released from the prison of self, that is indeed release, for that is the greater prison. When this release takes place, then one cannot be outwardly imprisoned. And he continues on like this for quite some time, and then he finishes with these words, and this is the thing I really want to say. He says, the afflictions which come to humanity sometimes tend to center the consciousness upon the limitations, and this is a veritable prison. Release comes by making of the will a door through which the confirmations of the Spirit come. Now, when he said that, you can imagine how it must have blown the mind of the reporter. He says, you get some kind of release from your prison when you make the will of God. When you make the will of God a door through which confirmations of the Spirit come. For some reason, Abdu'l-Baha is saying that contentment and acceptance of the will of God is a door which enables God's confirmations to come. So the reporter immediately interjected, and he said, what do you mean by the confirmations of the Spirit? And then here is the answer Abdu'l-Baha gave. He said, the confirmations of the Spirit are those powers and gifts which some are born with, and which men sometimes call genius, but for which others have to strive with infinite pains. They come to the man or woman who accepts life with radiant acquiescence. And this is, of course, one of the most well-known statements of Abdu'l-Baha. He's saying that there are certain powers, there are certain gifts that you can get if you accept your whole life with radiant acquiescence. And of course, what does acquiescence mean?
Acceptance?
Yes, I think we could look it up in the dictionary, but I think it means to accept, to tolerate. But he does not say you accept life with begrudging acquiescence. He didn't say begrudging. He said accept life with radiant acquiescence. It's one thing to accept and to acquiesce. It's a lot harder to accept it with radiance. And so
I have a question though on this. If we're saying that happiness is spiritually based and anything that brings sadness is non-spiritual, in the writings you'll see sometimes where Baha'u'llah said, my pen grieves. Or, there is a sense of sorrow or grief in some of the scriptures. So how could you explain to someone like me what is conveyed in that?
Yes, I don't think that when you're upset over something in the world, like an injustice or the behavior of somebody, something like that that can upset you, I don't think he's talking about that as being contrary to contentment. In other words, sad things can happen to you, but you still acknowledge that they are good for you, that they are something in life that you need, and you receive them with great joy. There's one kind of unhappiness where things happen in life that you should be sad about. Somebody passes away or there's an injustice or something like that. But this does not contradict the law of contentment, which says that you accept that unhappiness. You accept it with radiant acquiescence, even though it causes unhappiness. So it's a different form. There's a passage of Baha'u'llah that really interests me. He said, ask not of me that which we desire not for thee, then be content with what we have ordained for thy sake. For this is that which profiteth thee, if therewith thou dost content thyself. And that's a very fascinating thing, because he's saying that when he ordains something for your sake that you're not happy with, he says it will profit you if you content yourself with it. So if you're not content with it, you lose twice. You lose twice, really, because first of all, you get the bad thing, and then you don't get any profit from it because you only get profit from it if you're content with it. And so it's quite true that life does deal unhappiness, but there's a reason for it. There's a spiritual truth behind it. Abdu'l-Baha said he learned this at the age of 9 years old. He said when he was 9 years old, he got consumption. I don't know if you read that. And they thought he was going to die. And it turns out that without that, he would not have been able to travel with his father to Baghdad. And it would have been 10 years that would happen. So he said he learned even at the age of 9 that when things happen that are contrary to your wishes, to realize that that cloud will have a silver lining. So I think that kind of answers that kind of question. I think there's another famous statement of Baha'u'llah where he says the source of all good is trust in God, submission unto his command, and contentment with his holy will and pleasure. So these are just a few things. I want to get beyond contentment, but you asked me what is the essential component to happiness. Well, contentment is one of them.
I feel like, Tom, this bleeds into another topic, which is, you hear this so common statement. It's almost the most standard statement against the existence of God is, if God exists, why does he let bad things happen? And I feel like this bleeds into that, does it not?
Yes, of course. So there is a mystery in suffering. And I don't know if we can go to it right now. In fact, we'll have to have another topic on it. We all suffer in life. And there is a mystery about it because it does lead to all kinds of spiritual growth. So we'll leave that for another session. But I think it's very important that we understand, first of all, we have to say to ourselves, our life is perfect. We need to be happy with our life and accept it, even if it's no good. We need to be happy with ourselves. We need not to be so hard on ourselves. We need to, not be so down on ourselves. And we need to be happy with other people. These are some of the things. So let's move on and let's talk about how one can become happy.
Yeah, I actually was thinking about this right now. I was like, is there an age, if you haven't learnt this essence of being happy, that it's too late to learn to be happy? Or is it something we can always learn to do?
This is a very interesting question, and I think it's probably true of everything we're going to talk about in this whole course. Always a person can change. Always one can improve their life. We may have been handicapped with the journey that our life has taken up till now. But I know many people that have had a very, very long journey, a very sad journey, and yet at some stage in their life realized that it was all for their own betterment. So I don't think that we should ever resign ourselves to the fact that something that God has prescribed to mankind is unattainable to them because we passed some certain point in life. In fact, we're all spiritual embryos. We're all just in the womb. Our spiritual life is going to last for eternity. So I don't see how it could be that just a small portion, so he's in the second trimester and he's in the third trimester in pregnancy, but they're both just infants. That's all we really are. So I would say the answer is no. I would say that at all times, one can take one more step towards happiness or anything else.
So to build on what you've just said, then, it's potentially also possible, if you didn't attain it in this world, in future worlds, or after we leave this world and growing closer to God, that we potentially can also learn.
Of course, progress is infinite throughout all the worlds of God. The reason I chose happiness as my first subject is because it bestows upon you the powers and capacities to attain all of the other ones. You see the first point that Abdu'l-Baha made, that when you're unhappy, it diminishes your mental and intellectual and spiritual capacity, and when you're happy, it boosts them. So I would think that if you're unhappy, no pun intended, if you're unhappy with your spiritual progress, maybe first work on your happiness, because that's something you can control. We can't control what happens to us in life. We can't change it. I remember Mark Twain, if you know, he said, everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. And he was just making a joke. Okay, but it's true. We talk about things that we can't do anything about. So the thing is, you cannot control what happens to you in life. You can't control it. to a very limited extent. But you can control how you respond to it. You can control how you receive it. And so why don't we focus on what we can do and what we can control and stop worrying about things that we cannot? Because ultimately, if we do that, we're going to come to the conclusion that happiness is a choice. It's a choice. You choose to be happy or not. It's not something that just comes to you, like unhappiness came to me, it attacked me, or sadness attacked me or something. No, happiness is a choice. Really, life is nothing but a happiness test. That's really all it is. Everything in life is a happiness test. If you could have like a video game where you get the highest score, and every time you respond to something with happiness, you get a few points. And every time you respond to something with sadness, you lose points. And at the end of life, we take score. That really is what life is all about. It's just a happiness test.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Well, I guess I'm going to start playing. No, it's an interesting way to look at it. I think that we don't realize it's the simple things that actually make the biggest difference. And we're so fixated on everything we don't have control over that, the most important things we do have control over.
Yes, that's true. Another habit we also have is that we tend to blame our unhappiness on other things or other people. When we're not happy, we blame it on him or her, my husband, my wife, my friends, my dog. You blame your unhappiness in life on other people or other things, my boss or whatever. We should never blame our unhappiness on anyone else. We should only blame it on ourselves because we chose to let those things make us unhappy or let those people make us unhappy.
Great insights.
It also makes me think of, throughout my life, I've met individuals who are just, for some reason, very happy. They're naturally smiling and they're just generally happy all the time. And I always think about these people from times in my life. I marvel at these people. Like, I wonder, how did they achieve this state of just natural happiness? They're typically happy. They're typically very simple people, I found. But they're here in Australia, and I've met them in America and other places. And for some reason, they're just naturally happy and smiley people. Do you know what I'm talking about, Tom?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think if you really want to know the essence of happiness, I found it in one hidden word of Baha'u'llah. It's in the Arabic hidden words. And basically, he started out by using what I thought was the wrong word. Because I'm quite a pedantic person. I like the meaning of words. So I was reading this hidden word, and Baha'u'llah said, should prosperity befall thee? He started like that. And I said, hold on, Baha'u'llah. Prosperity is a good thing. Prosperity, it doesn't just mean physical wealth. It means all kinds of things where you prosper. And he says, should prosperity befall thee? And I said, befall is a word that you use for bad things. Why are you using the wrong word, Baha'u'llah? I'm thinking, of course, he was not using the wrong word. He's using it quite on purpose, but that's the first thing that struck me. But he continued, he said, should prosperity befall thee, rejoice not. And should abasement come upon thee, grieve not. For both shall pass away and be no more. And as I thought about this, I realized the essence of happiness is contained in this quotation. Because he's saying that when good things happen to you, things that you like, prosperity in the broad sense, he says, don't rejoice in those things. Don't be happy about them. And when bad things happen to you, abasement and so on, don't be sad. And then I thought about this and I said, you know what? One is harder than the other. In other words, to not be sad when bad things happen to you, I can kind of get my mind around. I can say, okay, I didn't like it, it's not so good, but I'll accept it. But when good things happen to you and you are happy in them and you rejoice in them, that's a harder thing to do. You see, if you rejoice in praise, you're always going to be unhappy when you don't get it. If you rejoice in attention, you're always going to be unhappy when you don't get it. In other words, if you rejoice in things like that, then sooner or later, they're going to bite you because he's going to take them away from you. So Baha'u'llah says, don't have that kind of happiness. Basically, he's saying that happiness is a bit like cholesterol. In a way. I mean, I'm making a joke, but there's good cholesterol and there's bad cholesterol. Isn't that right? I don't know which one is which. You know, I have to ask the doctor about that. But the point is, he's saying there's good happiness and there's bad happiness. And if you pin your happiness on praise or attention or glory or fame or wealth, then you're always going to sooner or later be unhappy. So he says, when you get those things, don't rejoice. Rejoice not. And when abasement comes, then also don't be sad. In other words, there's a good happiness and there's a bad happiness, and we need to learn to not think that these things will lead to our happiness. When we get them, we should accept them, say that's great, but we're not so attached to these things that somehow they're going to be taken away from us. Baha'u'llah says when to be happy and when to not be happy. And of course he says, sorrow not, save that thou art far from us. Rejoice not, save that thou art drawing near and returning unto us. In other words, the only time you should ever be unhappy is when you're far from God. And the only time you should be happy is when you're drawing closer to God.
So you're saying the benchmark for happiness should be the will of God. So if we recognize that whether they're sad things or happy things that happen to us, that they're the will of God, then our reaction to both will be the same.
I think so. And I think we should really examine ourselves to see if we're not looking for happiness in the wrong places. Because that's what Baha'u'llah is warning for you. He says, look out for this bad happiness, this wrong happiness. There's many sources of unhappiness. Probably the greatest source of unhappiness is people-related. People, they really do make you unhappy at times. Isn't that right? They disappoint you. They disapprove of you. They criticize you. They don't answer your phone calls. They don't answer your emails, or I don't know, whatever. People really make us unhappy. And we need to, first of all, not worry so much about what other people think about us. We need to really just let that go. I remember hearing a talk by Rihia Khanum. She gave it way back in the 1980s. She said she gave herself a birthday present on her 50th birthday. And she said the gift was that she would no longer worry or care about what other people thought about her. She said this in a talk. And at the time I was thinking, that's an interesting thing. She said, it's the greatest gift I ever received in life. And if you know her character, you know that she really did not worry about what other people thought about her. And that was a tremendous weight, a tremendous burden that was taken off her head. People-related unhappiness, we need to really be careful about that. I remember reading about this word in German. It's a form of people-related happiness and unhappiness. The Germans call it, I think it's called Schadenfreude. Have you heard of that word?
Yes,
Sounds
I've
German.
heard it before.
Okay. Schadenfreude means taking pleasure in the misfortune of others. Okay.
I'm sure it came across in one of my psychology subjects.
Yes. Well, I don't know why the Germans had to come up with that word, because we all do it. We take pleasure in the misfortune of other people. It's a people-related happiness that is really wrong. I think that there must be the opposite, which maybe it's called Freudenschade, I don't know, the flip side, where you're upset when other people succeed. You know, when someone else succeeds at work or love or investments, or they win the lottery or something like that, then you are actually unhappy with somebody else's happiness. In other words, these are all people-related happinesses and unhappinesses. And we have to understand that we do not need to pin our happiness on envy and jealousy. We do not need to pin our happiness on things like envy and jealousy. You know, Baha'u'llah said, verily, the heart wherein the least remnant of envy yet lingers shall never attain my everlasting dominion, nor inhale the sweet savors of holiness. You know, most things, he says, try to fix it. You know, you get a little better. But with envy, he said, no. You can't even have the least remnant of it, of envy, because it's a people-related unhappiness is what I'm thinking. So that's one source of unhappiness that really bothers us. It's part of the world. It's part of the world of nature, the material world, but it does really mess a lot of us up a lot of times.
When you the previous comment you made in regards to be careful, where you look for happiness. The imagery that came to my mind was a quotation where, there's a bird soaring and it looks down and it comes down to feed its desires and sullies its wings and it can't take flight again. That's
Yes.
the imagery that it brought to mind when you said, "Where are you looking for happiness?"
That's right. That's a beautiful quotation of Baha'u'llah. I think we have to stop letting other people play with our own happiness and unhappiness. People that are looking for fame and glory and attention and status from other people, that we think that we want to be good in the eyes of other people or have attention. We're just letting other people control our own happiness and unhappiness. Don't let people play with you in that regard. Just you decide your own sense of self-worth, your own sense of true happiness, and don't let other people mess with that.
I think also from what you're saying is that we need to have our vision and our perspective fixed on something higher. Otherwise, it's like we don't have our blinders, and it's going to be easy for us to fall prey to these things of what other people think of us, or what society wants of us, or how much money we're earning. But if our vision is elevated, then we're less likely to succumb to these other forms.
What's been striking me is definitely that comment you made earlier about how we've definitely got to understand that the world is fleeting. I often have said this about the Baha'i faith, growing up with first of all, just the awareness and the knowledge that there is another world is so helpful in my state of being, in my state of happiness and contentment in this world. And definitely the idea that, we're moving on to another world does actually make it so much easier. And it's just simple knowledge, really, that, hey, there is another world and we're moving on to that and we'll be happy regardless, or we'll be moving on regardless. And you're right, fleeting does play a big part in that when you do think, okay, this is just one step. We like to think our lives are so long, and 70, 80, 90 years is a long time, but in the true scheme of things, it's fleeting. It's nothing. In a blink of an eye, we'll be moving on to the next world and hanging out with our friends and family. I often think of death the same way. We often get very upset in our culture that a friend or a relative has passed on, and for some reason that's considered very depressing and upsetting. But I don't quite feel that way because of the Baha'i writings. The Baha'i writings really make me feel like, they've moved on. It's almost like, I like to say, they've gone to a tropical paradise, and I'll be going there sooner or later, and I'll be rejoining them. And so why do I need to be unhappy that they've moved on to that tropical paradise, and I'll be rejoining them sooner or later? So that, I always find that marvelous about the faith, is that knowledge and awareness makes me content and happy in this world.
Yes, and I think that it also helps you to understand the nature of this world. When you say it's fleeting, then you realize that we shouldn't let it change us. Really, I think you need to think of this life as a test, as almost like a game that you have to play and you have to win. And you don't want this world to hurt your everlasting spiritual soul. Don't let other people, for example, change you because of their expectations or their standards or whatever. Don't make them tell you what to wear, not literally, but or what to think. Because, Al-Baha'i mentioned this. He said, do not become playthings of the ignorant. That was his term. He said, you can wear your clothes and your hair and your beard a certain way, but don't become a plaything of the ignorant. Because this life, people are a test. And we try to satisfy them and their wants rather than our needs and God's needs. So don't let what other people think of you, whether it's good or bad, go to your head. Don't let it go to your head if it's good. Don't let it go to your head if it's bad. Because in either case, it's not going to work.
Okay, so what are some other things we can do to make us happy?
Well, one of the really key things, I think, is that we should never mention or dwell on our own unhappiness. We should never mention or dwell on it. There's one statement of Al-Baha'i says, let us neither make known our sufferings nor complain of our wrongs. That's an actual statement from Al-Baha'i. You shouldn't make your sufferings known and you shouldn't complain of your wrongs. I remember about 10 or 15 years ago, I moved from the rural part of Tennessee where Joel was raised, where people, they had a very happy lifestyle. And I moved to Los Angeles. And when I got to Los Angeles, big bustling city, everybody was constantly moving and busy and traffic and all kinds of crazy things going on. And I noticed when I went to meetings at night, people would come into the meeting and they would say, "You can't believe what a bad day I had today. Oh my God, my boss said this and she said that and they did this and they would say all these things, and the person would say, you think you had a bad day? And then they would immediately one-up them in how bad their day was. And as I sat back and I watched this, having just come from Tennessee, I said, the whole mode of interaction of all these people is just to share their unhappiness, to just dwell on it. That's their whole mode of interaction. And I think that we should never dwell on our unhappiness. We should not enable other people to dwell on their unhappiness when they come to you and they want to, just keep dwelling on it. We need to find strategies to help them. And of course, we should never one-up somebody else when they are unhappy and say, "Well, I'm happy. I'm sadder than you are." We shouldn't do that. Rather, we should try to encourage them. Another thing that we need to do is we should not replay in our mind past negative experiences. This is a very important thing. In other words, we all have a negative experience, probably once a day, some people once an hour, some people once a minute. We have negative experiences, but when you replay them in your mind, they get worse and worse. There was a book by Maxwell Maltz called Cybernetics, which we referred to in one of the earlier sessions. And what you said, when you vividly imagine something, it is 90% the same as having experienced it for real. So if somebody says something to you very bad, or you have a negative experience, they were mean to you or something like that, if you go home and you replay it in your mind, they now did it to you twice. And if you replay it in your mind tomorrow, they did it to you 3 times. And over a year, they have now done it to you 365 times, even though they literally only did it once. As far as you're concerned, they did it. And furthermore, as you replay it in your mind, it gets worse. I've heard people tell stories, and I was actually there, but, the more they tell it, the worse it gets. And so when you replay something, we're told that this is like leaving something in your heart that grows. When you leave a weed in your heart, if you don't pull it out immediately, then it grows very quickly, and then it's hard to pull out. So you need to not replay in your mind. You need to instantly forgive, forget all bad things, and try to move ahead and always think to the future. I think that's another answer to your question.
Is there a magic pill on how we can do that? How do we instantaneously forgive someone?
Oh, instant forgiveness? Oh, absolutely. There is a magic pill for that. And we're going to have a whole session on forgiveness because it's a very important one, because we're all going to need to do it. Right now, let's just focus on the fact that we need to somehow not dwell on negative things. There is a prayer, I know that maybe not authentic now, but it says, "I will not dwell on the unpleasant things of life." And many Baha'is, they love that statement. So I think that's something we'll look at, but definitely let's talk about forgiveness when we come to it. I think another answer to your question, you said, how can we do it, is that we need to understand the mystery of suffering, which I mentioned already. Suffering is actually good for us. It helps us to develop our spiritual qualities, but we do not realize how important they are. We don't realize this yet. And so we'll have a whole session on that as well. I think now that we've talked a little bit about happiness and its importance to the spiritual life, that we should get down to micro tasks, because all things spiritual require that we learn to do something tomorrow that's just a little more than we're doing today. We don't have to think, how am I going to become the happiest person in the world overnight? We just have to think, what can I do tomorrow that's a little better than today in terms of happiness? And so I'm going to suggest a few micro tasks, ones that I have found or people have suggested to me, but I'm going to invite now all of our listeners to suggest to us other ones. They can write them, or they can email. I'll post my email address to them, or they can even, I'll call them up and we'll interview them. In other words, we want to all together discover some of these microtests. So I'm going to give you a few now that I think might work, and you can start them tomorrow. The first one I want to give you is what is called the Duchenne Smile. Are you familiar with the Duchenne Smile? Is anyone familiar with this?
I am, because I've studied sales, of course, with my career.
Oh.
And smiling is considered number one when you're meeting people. The smile is infectious, of course. And then, yes, I've definitely heard of this smile, that almost perfect smile that actually represents true happiness, right?
Duchenne, of course, Duchenne is the name of a French scientist. And he was able to find that there's a particular type of smile that has a certain physiology. I'm not quite sure exactly how it works, but your eyes go a certain way. Like, try to really smile really hard, okay? Now, the interesting thing is that the Duchenne smile, you can identify. And look, here's a few pictures of them on the internet. This is a Duchenne smile. Can you see that? You see how the face is and the lips and so on.
Yeah, the eyes squint a little bit, and you definitely see the cheeks and a little bit of lines actually in the cheeks and the eyes. And it's just that smile that you know is real. Like, you know how some people have a fake smile and other kind of sort of weird smiles,
yes,
but this one just looks genuine. I think that's
absolutely
what it is.
It's a genuine smile, and it's when someone has a fake smile, they say, "Oh, you're really kind of not." They get. But we all familiar with fake smiles, and also we know when we watch a TV show where they're not a very good actor, and they're not smiling very well as well. So smiling is very easy to know when it's real and when it's fake. So the Duchenne smile, they have done research on. They've actually done MRI scans on people when they do it, because when you actually do the full Duchenne smile, your muscles in your face stimulate various parts of your brain itself. And they found that when you do the Duchenne smile, if you do it correctly, it stimulates the emotional part of your brain that controls happiness, to such an extent that now they say that we used to think that you smile because you're happy, and now studies with MRI say you're happy because you smile. The Duchenne smile actually causes happiness, which is a fascinating thing in itself. In fact, there is a study in 2009 that you can look up on the internet, in which researchers found that people that were unhappy could spontaneously regulate their emotional happiness just through the Duchenne smile. Right. So this is an amazing thing, because as we know, a smile, it's a great communication device. It's tremendously reflective. When you smile at someone, they're likely to smile back at you. And so it's a very easy thing to practice. I suggest that tomorrow you do a couple of Duchennes. You find a Duchenne picture on the internet, you look at it, and you smile really hard. Go to the mirror and practice a few Duchenne smiles. And then when you really got it down right, make it a goal to do at least one major Duchenne when you first greet somebody tomorrow. Just out Duchenne them as best you can. And when you first meet them, okay? When they first come in that room, because the first greet of a smile is the greatest of all things. It completely changes the atmosphere of the room. And I have never seen any account of someone coming into the presence of Abdu'l-Baha when they didn't say, he greeted me with eye contact and a big smile and then said, "Are you happy?" This was his first thing that he did. When you see somebody, the first thing you should think about is give them that Duchenne smile, look at them in the eye, and try to make them happy with your smile and make yourself happy. Don't think, well, what am I going to tell them? How smart am I going to make myself appear in their presence, or how do I look? There's all kinds of other things that might fill our minds when we first greet a person, or it might be, oh my God, what is he doing here? Something like that. We do none of those things. The first thing we do tomorrow is that we practice in front of the mirror a Duchenne smile, and we get it so good, and then at least one person tomorrow, we give them that Duchenne when we first greet them. And you will be amazed at how well the discussion or the meeting will go if you can learn to do that. That's my first assignment as a micro test. What do you think of that one?
I love it.
So basically, we're saying that there's a bilateral relationship between happiness and smiling, and one will trigger the other. A smile will trigger happiness.
A smile will make you happy. And of course, both the other way around, a smile will make somebody else happy. And it's just an amazing thing. And, smiles are universal. It doesn't matter if you're from China or Africa or South America or you're a little baby or whatever. It's an inherently human characteristic. But we now know scientifically that it actually regulates. There's certain chemicals that are released in the brain when we do it. So that's your goal tomorrow, that you need to Duchenne somebody really hard. Whether you're talking to them, on Skype or Zoom or in person, you need to do that. That's one microtask I'm going to give you tomorrow. You want another microtask?
Yes, please.
Another microtask is to generally radiate happiness. And what I mean by radiate is that it's one thing to have internal happiness, internal contentment. It's another thing to give it out, to radiate it out. Consequently, I noticed that Baha'u'llah rarely mentioned joy without saying joy and radiance. Okay, he says that when you read the writings, you have to read them with joy and radiance. He said when you say prayers, you do it with joy and radiance. When you give money to the hukuk Allah, which he says, it's only going to be accepted if you give it with joy and radiance. He says when you die, you have to die with joy and radiance. In other words, everything we do in life, we do with joy and radiance. And he used the term joy and radiance so often that I almost got to think that the two were like the Batman and Robin. They were partners, joy and radiance.
Yeah.
Because they go together. Because it's one thing if the sun just had light and heat, but it didn't radiate heat and light. What good would the sun be just to have it if it didn't radiate? In other words, the radiance is essential part of it. So to radiate happiness, it's not that you're trying very hard to be happy. You're not thinking, I'm not going to dwell on the unpleasant of likes. You're trying to radiate it first. Because when you try to give something out, it will come to you. This is a mystery in life that people don't understand. They think if I don't have happiness, how can I radiate happiness? If I don't have love, how can I give out love? But in fact, we know from electricity that electricity cannot flow into something until it's flowing out of that thing. Isn't that an interesting thing? In other words, no electricity can come in to something unless it's also going out. This is why you have two plugs in addition to the ground in a plug. So you can test this out yourself. There's wires that are above streets and they're bare and they have electricity running through them. If you can jump up and grab it and hang on to it, you will not get electrocuted. You go try that yourself. But if you touch the ground and now it's coming out of you, then the electricity comes in. In other words, it's a circuit. It has to come out. Therefore, you can generate your own happiness by trying to radiate happiness to others. It will make you happy.
It also makes little sense to have something precious or beautiful and then put it in a box in the dark and keep it away. I mean, what's the purpose of having something if it can't be shared or it can't be if you have a beautiful rose garden, what use is it if no one can behold it?
That's right. Of course. So that makes perfect sense if you have it. But there are some people that are not happy and they dwell on their unhappiness and they don't know how to get it. And I'm suggesting to you that maybe try and radiate the happiness tomorrow as best you can. And maybe that radiation will be like a circuit, that once the electricity is going out, it will come in, and you'll find it comes from an unseen source, your happiness. So radiating happiness is something that every one of us can do, but we really have to plan it well. We have to plan it really hard. Tomorrow you're going to be doing something that is not very joyful. You hate it. You're going to mope around, you're going to do it, or you're going to see somebody that you don't really like or something. And you need to think, what am I going to do tomorrow that's like that? And then you're going to practice in your mind doing it with radiant happiness with the other person or with the job or so on. Just practice it a little bit in your mind beforehand. And then when you get to it tomorrow, try doing it with radiant happiness and see what happens. That's another microtask.
Can I
Go ahead,
ask,
Joe.
Tom? So are you really saying that we're just trying to make people happy? I mean, that's really all you're saying here is your task tomorrow is to go out there and try to make people happy, make them smile, make them laugh, make them feel great. And ironically, you almost said that the mystery is that it can really come back to you and ironically make you happy simultaneously? Or maybe...
Absolutely. I absolutely believe that if you can make somebody else happy, it will make you happy. In fact, there's a song which we'll play at the end of this session, and the lyrics go, make someone happy, make just one someone happy, and you will be happy too. It's a mystery, but it's very true.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, Tom had said we need to radiate happiness. And Joel, you said make someone happy. For me, there are two different things, because making someone happy is you're taking on a responsibility of how happiness you radiate is received, which personally I don't feel we should be responsible for, because Tom, you've asked us to be detached on how people perceive or think of us. So, I mean, by default, if the happiness you radiate is genuine, then you're going to make someone happy. But that should not be our aim. That should just be an organic outcome.
Okay, so I like that you're finding that distinction, but I'm going to take Joel's one as the third microtask. Our first microtask is a Duchenne Smile. We can try that one. Our second one, if we want, is to radiate happiness. Try to radiate whether we're with someone or not. A third task is to try to make other people happy in any other way, whether we radiate or not. There are many ways that you can make someone happy. You can think very carefully about what those things are. You can praise them. You can give them attention. You can show them respect. If I were to write all the ways that would make people happy, you can identify them, and you can think about who you're going to meet tomorrow. Remember, a microtask has to be specific to what you're going to do tomorrow. So you think who you're going to see tomorrow. You say, well, what makes that person happy? Not a bad happiness, to feed their ego or something like that, but a good happiness, and we'll try and make them happy too. That's a second one. I agree with Sarah that radiating happiness is one particular thing which we can do, and trying to make other people happy is something else, but we can make that a microtask as well.
So like through an act of service, potentially.
Oh, yes. In fact, what you need to do is sit down and think, what are all the ways you can make someone happy?
Well, that makes me think of the 5 love languages, if you've ever heard of that. And, Sarah just said one, acts of service is one, quality time. Some people really, basically the concept of the 5 love languages is that we all seem to have one primary way that we receive love and feel that we're loved. And then since that's your love language. And so there are acts of service, so doing something really nice for somebody, of course. There's quality time. Some people would just really respond to somebody sitting there, listening and talking with them and spending quality time. There's sincere compliments. Some people just really like words of affirmation. Of course, gifts. You could bring somebody flowers or just a nice gift. Yeah, and I think the final one, which I like to say, Sarah, is physical affection, which is like hugs, pats on the back, high fives. A good friend Nick in America, he's a physical affection guy. He always high fives me and pats me on the back. Yeah. And so those are ways that we can give happiness out, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's really great when they hug you and they give you money and they praise you and they do it all at once. Yeah, but this is wonderful because you are thinking very carefully about the other person. You're being otherish and you're thinking, what are all the different ways that can make them happy? And you're going to set yourself a goal to do just one of those things to one person tomorrow. You're going to plan it out. You're going to work it out. The other thing I should warn you is that you should also think very carefully about what makes people unhappy and try to avoid doing those things. What makes people unhappy? Well, not listening to them makes them unhappy. Not respecting them makes them unhappy. Not looking them in the eye makes them unhappy. Not knowing their name makes them, I'm just throwing these things out. Okay. In other words, there are many ways to make people unhappy as well. And you know that it's a prohibition in the Babi faith. The Bab said that if you cause unhappiness or grief to somebody, you have to pay a fine. Did you know that? There's a certain number of mithqals of gold that you had to pay if you ever made somebody unhappy. That's in the Bobby Faith. Thank God Baha'u'llah didn't renew that, because we'd all go broke, with that kind of law. But the point is that we need to think very carefully about what makes other people happy. And, it might be specific for each person. And then set ourselves a micro test to do one of those things to that person tomorrow. And then we also need to think about what causes unhappiness. You know what really causes unhappiness to people? Is criticism. Criticism never works. It never goes well. Even a suggestion to do something is taken as criticism. It doesn't make people happy. There's an old saying, it says that Socrates, he went around giving people advice. They poisoned him. you see. Advice never works. And don't ever think that there's a phrase we have in English, which is a total lie. It's called constructive criticism. Have you ever heard of that phrase?
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
It doesn't work. Take my word for it. I'm a professional musician, and many times people will write to me, Baha'is and students and so on, and they say, I wrote this piece of music, and I want you to be brutally honest with me, and I want you to tell me the truth. If you don't like it, just tell me. I want to hear this. So they say these things like that to me, and then so I say, well, it's not so good here and there. And they go away crying and they never talk to me again. And I realize, I'm not going to make that mistake anymore, because everybody wants praise. Everybody wants encouragement. Be very careful with giving advice. Another thing you need to take away from your vocabulary if you want to make people happy is take away these words. Never say these words again for the rest of your life. And these words are, I told you so. Have you ever heard that phrase, I told you so? Okay, when somebody comes up with an idea or a truth and they realize it, we're so self-centered that we bring it back to us, that I thought of it first, I heard of it first, rather than just rejoicing that they said something true and say that's so right, and don't turn it back on yourself to be so selfish. There are many things, if we just think a little bit about what makes people happy and not happy, we can easily set ourselves a micro test tomorrow for that.
That's great advice.
That's great.
Do you want another one? How many micro tests do you want?
I don't know. I feel like I'm already loaded up, but yeah, you might as well.
Okay, I'll give you one more, and then I want all of the listeners, all of you out there that are listening to this now, I want you to suggest some micro tasks. Or I want you to try the ones that I'm giving you here and now and tell me your experiences. My last one, micro task, is to take a person that you know very well and impersonate them. You may think that this is funny, okay, but everybody knows somebody that's just the happiest person they ever met. They're always happy, at all times, and they're always cheerful, and they always have a smile on their face, and maybe we're grumpy, right? So what we do is that we think of that person as we're walking into a room. We're going to go to our assembly meeting or something like that. Oh my God, I got to do that. So we think, I'm going to walk in and be that person. I have 3 people in my life that I use when I'm grumpy, and which is, basically about 15 times a day I'm grumpy. So I always call on one of my 3 people and I just impersonate them. The first person I pick is Russ Garcia. I don't know if anyone remembers Russ Garcia now, but he's the happiest guy I ever met. He always had a smile. He always greeted everyone with a full Duchenne smile. I understand that he came out of the womb and he smiled at the doctor on the operating table. He smiled his whole life. And all I have to do is say, I'm going to be Russ Garcia. I see his face, and immediately I can be happy. Another person I use for this purpose is Collis Featherstone. I don't know if any of you remember him. He was a wonderful Baha'i, hand of the cause, and I never once saw him greet anybody without the biggest smile on his face. He would say, how's Tom? How's Joel? How's Sarah? He always knew everybody's name too. I have no idea how he could do that. And so all I have to do is think of him and I'm happy. The third person I use, believe it or not, is my mother. I have no idea how my mother has genes so different to me, but my mother smiled at everybody. She smiled so ridiculously a lot that we would come home from school and she would have somebody that she just met and says, look who I brought home. I met them on the elevator. I met them on the street, or, something like that. And we were so embarrassed about our mother in those days because she would just smile and talk to everybody in the store and the supermarket and the elevator. And we'd say, Mother, be quiet. Don't be so happy. Don't smile at everybody. But the thing is that I turned about 50 years old and I realized that everybody loves my mother and everybody hates me. And I realized, yeah, it works. It really works. So I use her sometimes. And you can pick your own person, your own happy person, and you can try to impersonate them. Don't think that you're faking it when you do that. Believe me, you're not faking it. You're just finding a source whereby you can bring out your own true inner happiness. I remember Abdu'l-Baha once, they asked him, or he was answering the question, how can someone become noble? And he said words to the effect that if you want to be noble, think about what a noble person is like, how they act, how they behave. Think about them and then imitate that, copy that. And then you will find that you are noble. And when I first read that, I thought, is Abdu'l-Baha, is he telling us to fake it? Is he saying fake it? It's like there's an old saying, it says in show business, the most important thing is sincerity. Once you can fake that, you've got it made. And so I was thinking that maybe that's what Abdu'l-Baha was saying. But then when I thought carefully, what Abdu'l-Baha is saying is that you are truly noble. Baha'u'llah says, I have created thee, noble have I created thee. So you're not faking it, you're just using the example, the dynamic force of example of someone else to put you in the mood to bring out your true self, which is truly noble, and you're also truly happy as well. So that's another micro task, to emulate someone, to be someone, just for a few moments tomorrow. Those are 3 or 4 micro tests I can give you, and I'm sure that people are going to write in or even tell us some more micro tests, but I think that's enough. But you must make yourself a goal for today and for the whole next few days or weeks until we have the next session, that every single day you're going to listen to what we've talked about here and find something very small in anything that we've said here that you can do tomorrow to make yourself more happy or less unhappy, or to not dwell on things that are happy. In other words, something that will work on your happiness in a microtask way. And if we start this tomorrow, we will find that our mind becomes stronger. Our mental capacity becomes more alert. And suddenly we find that life becomes much easier to deal with.
So let's summarize those quick 4 micro tasks then. So number 1 is the Duchenne Smile.
Yes.
Number 2 is to radiate happiness. Number 3 is to make someone happy, either through an act of service or finding a way that would make someone happy. And then the 4th one is to impersonate someone that embodies the happiness that you're trying to cultivate within yourself.
Wow. I'm very happy that you remembered those, so you've got a really good mind. So yes, those are good. And you don't have, those are just 4 suggestions. You can obviously create a microtask about anything that we talked about in this session. And I really want to hear from you now. From now on, I want to hear from everyone that's listened to these, how they're going with their microtasks. But that's a very good summary of what I said today.
That's awesome. Well, I want to go ahead and wrap this up now because I think that's a great place to end this discussion. But I really want to thank Sarah for joining us and congratulate her again on her marriage. I'm very happy. And it was great to see you last night. We got to hang out with Sarah and her husband Raj and some other friends, which is such a delight after not getting to hang out with a lot of people during the lockdown period. Of course, I want to thank Tom. Thank you so much. This session's been really great. I really, really enjoyed this. I feel like this is the best one we've had so far. And I'm really excited to work on my microtasks starting tomorrow. I'm already thinking of ideas when I go to work and so forth and interact with customers and so forth tomorrow. How can I make them happy? So thank you so much, Tom. Thank you, Sarah. And we look forward to the next session, and we look forward to everybody's comments. So please, like Tom said, throw in your comments. Tell us your experiences of what you did with your happiness and your microtasks. And any questions are always welcome on YouTube and Facebook and so forth. Thank you, guys.
A big thank you, Tom, as well from me. So I think these insights couldn't have come at a better time. Embracing this new phase of my life. I've been thinking about these questions a lot, which way next, what, and I think this is going to be a great insight to actually help make those decisions.
Oh, great. All right. I'm happy. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.